Hello, and I hope you're having a lovely time. Hope you had a great bank holiday. I'm just going to give you a little bit of a rundown of the words of the work for the week. Here, I'm going to first of all start by reading you a story. Now, what I want to do is we're going to look at mortals and gods and mortals. That's a really good thing. And I know you've looked at the Greek stories, but I'm going to move you on and have a look at something else. So, I'm going to read you Anansi and the Box of Stories. Once he got used to the whole thing, Anansi found it quite convenient to be a Spider-Man. He hadn't started life that way. Nancy had once been a fairly ordinary human being, with a wife named Aso, a son named Nictuma, and an extraordinary sense of humour. It was the humour that got him into trouble. Anansi was a practical joker, and he never knew when to stop. The victim of one of Anansi's jokes got so mad that he punched Anansi right on the nose. In fact, the injured party struck so hard that the joker broke into lots of little pieces. When Anansi got all his parts back together again, he discovered that he'd become something else altogether. He had a flat body, 8 legs, and some strange new appendages and abilities. How odd, observed Anansi. Ah! Screamed Aso. When he looked in the mirror, Anansi was inclined to agree with Aso. A giant spider was pretty ugly, but then he discovered that he could change back into a man at will. He decided that being a Spider-Man was all right. These events took place very early in time. One might say, before there was such a thing as time, the world was rather different. The deities lived in the clouds, humans and animals on Earth, and sometimes they visited back and forth. There wasn't much to do, and though most animals and humans and deities seemed perfectly content with the way things were, Anansi wasn't. The Joker soon discovered that being a Spider-Man didn't make the world any more interesting. Animals and peoples and deities still got mad at him when he played their jokes on them, and sometimes nobody would talk to him. One day Anansi got too bored to stay on Earth. He slung a long, strong strand of spider web silk into the sky and climbed up into the clouds to see what the gods were up to. Not much was going on there either, but that was when Anansi first noticed the box. It wasn't gold or silver, and it didn't glow with magic. It was just a wooden box, and although beautifully carved and highly polished, it didn't look especially valuable. So why did the sky gods always keep it at his side? The question bothered Anansi so much that he asked a deity about it. What's in the box, anyhow? They're full of stories, the deity replied. What are these stories? I don't know. I've never seen one. The deity wandered off to nap on a cloud. Anansi couldn't get his mind off the wooden box and whatever was inside. Maybe stories are something to eat, he thought. Maybe there's something to wear. But the great cloud deity never opens that box. Could there be something dangerous inside? Trying not to seem too interested, Anansi casually asked the sky god if he would sell the wooden box. All he got was a glare at Anansi. All he got in return was a glare that sent Anansi scurrying for a hold in the cloud. But once the Spider-Man got set on something, he'd never give up. Every day Anansi asked him to sell the box. Every day he refused. Till one day, finally, all right! The cloud deity shouted, I'll sell you the box. Then the sky god chuckled, but the price will be high. He demanded just 4 items in exchange for the box. But those 4 items were ill-tempered creatures with teeth or fangs or other unpleasant qualities. The sky god demanded that Anansi bring him the python, known to swallow people whole, the lion, whose teeth were as big as spears, the hornets, wasps of poisonous stings, and Momotia. Momotia? Stammered Anansi, taken aback. Momotia, said the sky god firmly. I'll do it, declared Anansi. But he was downhearted as he swung back to the earth on his web. How was he going to capture those creatures without being badly damaged himself, or even killed? He discussed the problem with his wife and son. And I even have to catch Momotia, Anansi sighed. Well, he can't just mope around here, Asso said. You might as well start with the python. Here's what you do. So the next day, Anansi and his son went for a walk in the woods. She's wrong, Anansi proclaimed loudly, waving a big wooden stick in the air. This is longer. Oh, you know Mum's always right, said his son. The stick is shorter. As they argued, a large, sleek head rose from a tree branch. It was a python, who could surely swallow even a giant spider whole. What are you two quarrelling about? Demanded Python. My mum claims you're longer than this stick, said Nitakuma. And I say that no snake is that long, said Anansi. That's easy enough to prove, hissed Python. The great snake slid off on the tree branch and stretched out along the stick, which was indeed a bit shorter than the python. Quickly, Anansi spun his strongest web and bound the thrashing python to the stick. When the snake could no longer move, they picked up the stick and carried it with the python attached to the sky god. Sky god merely said, "You aren't finished yet." Anansi and Nakuma went back to Earth with Asso. That was easy, bragged Nakuma. But I still have to catch Mimosha, groaned Anansi. Save Mimosha for last, said Asso. That how big you are trick worked fine on Python. Lions aren't too bright either. So, here's what you do. The next day, Anansi and Nakuma carried a large sack to the rock where the lion lay sleeping in the sun. They pretended to argue again. Of course he won't fit in there, proclaimed Anansi. That's a really big lion. Mum's always right, Nakuma began. But lions whose teeth could surely pierce spider skin yawned and sat up before they could get through their act. Of course, the lion let them try to see his bag for size. They quickly tied the bag shut, and they took the lion to the sky god in the sack. The sky god grinned. You aren't finished yet. And Anansi and Nakuma went back to Earth to talk with Asso. We'll never catch Mimosha that way, grumbled Anansi. Catch the Hornets Nest, Asso said. Here's what you should do. The next day, Anansi and Nakuma went into the woods, carrying 2 buckets of water, a big empty gourd, a rope. They found the Hornet's Nest hanging in the tree, buzzing ominously. Very quietly, Nakuma climbed an adjoining tree. He lowered the rope and lifted up both buckets of water. And he began pouring the water onto the hornet's nest. The hornets, whose poison was surely deadly than any spider, was surely deadly to any spider, came swarming out. And they looked mad enough to sting anything they saw, which was Anansi. Hello, friends, called Anansi. It isn't the rainy season, so I know you weren't prepared for this storm. But look, he raised the empty gourd. You can keep dry in here until the downpour ends. So the hornets flew into the gourd, and Anansi quickly sealed it shut with spider's webs. And they took the hornets to the sky god. Laughing, the sky god said, "You're not finished yet." Anansi and Nakuma went back to Earth to talk with Asso. Well, now you have to catch Mimosha, she said. But Mimosha is invisible, and even I can't catch something that's invisible. It's fair. If you can't see it, you can't catch it. And Mimosha's magic. The touch of her hands can kill whoever annoys her. And she is easily annoyed, added Anansi. I've given this a lot of thought, said Asso. Here's what you do. So Anansi and Nakuma carved up a wooden doll and covered it with a thick layer of sicky sap from a gum tree. They put the doll in a lovely clearing and hid themselves in a nearby bush. Anansi was very nervous. For all he knew, Mimosha had been watching the whole time. Mimosha would touch him at any moment now, and he'd surely be a dead giant spider. But they waited, and finally Nakuma nudged Anansi. Listen, he whispered. Anansi heard a high-pitched sound. He listened harder and heard the words. Why won't you answer me? A voice demanded. I'm warning you, Your rudeness really annoys me. Then the gum doll's head jerked. Mimosa touched your doll. The doll's head shook hard. And Mimosa stuck, whispered Anansi, stifling a giggle. The doll's head jerked out the other way. Then its body jerked twice. The high-pitched sound got so shrill it was impossible to understand any words. Clearly, Mimosha's hands and feet were all stuck to the gum doll. Standing a little distance away, Anansi wrapped the gum doll and Mimosa in a cocoon of spider silk. They dragged the whole wad back to the sky god. The sky god was not happy, but a lot of the other deities had heard the bargain he'd made with Anansi, so Anansi got the carved wooden box and took it back to Earth. Day after day, Anansi polished the box and admired it, but he still didn't know whether there were actually any stories inside, or even what stories were. Of course, one day, the Spider-Man cracked the box lid open just a little and peeked inside. Stories came pouring out. True stories, fiction stories, scary stories, love stories. All kinds of stories flew out of that box. Anansi heard bits of sentences as they fluttered by him. Scattered all over the world, the people and animals heard the stories too. Jumping and laughing, they caught some of those stories and began to tell their children and their friends. And that's where stories came from. So, I don't want to keep you much longer because we've spent that time reading that story. But what I'd like you to do this week, first thing first, research some Anansi stories. Look into some Anansi stories and choose which one's your favourite. Say why. I'm not asking for a lot. Little paragraph saying, this one's my favourite because. Perfect. Day 2. Now we know what Anansi stories are. What I'd like you to do is think of what your Anansi story is going to be. So what could your Anansi, so for instance, I might want a story that's how Anansi made football. Okay, that's going to be my story. How does Anansi come up with football? Now I need to also come up with how he's going to do that. So how Anansi made football, and he's going to do it by making friends with people and by getting forgiveness from people who've upset him. That's my story. So you've got to come up with your story and what it's going to be about. Next, we're going to plan our story. So we know how the story goes. We need beginning, introduction, what happens, problem, what's the problem? Well, in my story, Anansi wants to play football. Then we're going to have the inciting incident or thing that happens. So Anansi wants to play football, but he doesn't have enough friends. So he's going to try and look for some friends. All right, then we've got the climax. The climax, he manages to get enough friends after he gets forgiveness from the crocodile. And then my resolution is they all play a game of football. My ending is they go home and he invented football. Lovely. So that's going to be how we plan our story. Then we're going to do our first draft. Now, in our first draft, I want you to think of what is Anansi like? When you read those stories, what does he come across? These are traditional tales and myths and legends. So they don't start like a fairy tale. You're not really going to put once upon a time because they're not fairy tales. When you do your research into Anansi, find out how he generally is. What does he act like? Think about all these things. How do these stories start? These are all things you can be using. Then remember to use your plan to help you get that beginning, middle, end, that problem, that resolution. All those things should be in your story. And then, of course, punctuation, full stops, blah, blah, blah. And then your final piece will be to do a second draft. Now, what I'd like you to focus on is obviously not only proofreading, making sure that it makes sense, to make sure your spellings, your punctuation is correct. Not only looking at using more adventurous vocabulary, that would be great, to try and work out maybe, you know, like I said, I remember I've been into a reception class where they didn't use sad, they didn't use happy, they used far better words than that. So I know that you're year 3, you can do that. But what I want you to look at is how you can change your story, as in how can you change your story to make it more complex, to make it better, to make it deeper. If you've got a resolution where all, like in my story, maybe in my first draft, I say Anansi just has to say sorry. But maybe I think about that and say, when I want when someone wants me to forgive them, do I always just go, sorry, yeah, that's fine? Or sometimes do I think maybe that person, maybe Nancy has to do something, maybe he has to make the football in order to convince the crocodile to play. So think about how you can make your story more interesting and change things for the better in your story. So what we're going to do this week is we're going to focus on writing our own Anansi tale. Now for next week, I'd like us to do some research into the Anansi stories and do a bit of myth finding and things like that. But for now, that's kind of the idea. So we really have a good idea of what an Anansi story is. For anyone who has issues Googling Anansi, it's Anansi, Anansi the spider. It's a common West African myth and also Jamaican. I know that when I was in school, I learned about Anansi and I was taught it as a Jamaican myth. So I'm not sure. Maybe if, yeah. But I don't know, there's a lot of West African roots, so it kind of makes sense as well that there's Jamaican influence in there. I hope you have a wonderful week. I look forward to contacting you during the week. Feel free to ask me any questions if you've got any, and have a lovely time. Bye.